Yeah, so I'm Richie. You might remember me from running around trying to fix AC or toilets or a beer supply or food or whatever. So quick show of hands. Who has heard of Prometheus? No, seriously. So like before Prometheus, historically, the monitoring landscape has been really fragmented because there have been a ton of different solutions, quite a few of them like really ancient. I won't name names, but you can all think of some. A lot of these data formats which they are using are really hard to implement. They might be proprietary. They might be both. Most of them like hard encode a hierarchical data model, which is like once you finish designing a hierarchical data model, it's already wrong for someone else and probably yourself as well. And this is actually enforced by those standards. Almost none of these like actually focused on metrics. So there's one thing which like was like the lingua franca or is still the lingua franca. Who has heard of SNMP? Who likes SNMP? There's one. Get him. And as always, when talking about standards and especially new standards, XKCD 927 applies. So after Prometheus, like Prometheus has like kind of become a de facto standard in the cloud native space, and I think most of you will agree. And this ease of adoption of the Exposition format has led to a huge explosion in compatible metrics endpoints. And while we have like a ton of operational experience which has been put into that format, it has been designed between a very few people. So there's no like wider taking into account of other people's needs and stuff. Also, there's something which is a highly political thing. Basically, if you have a vendor, if you have a project, and they are like forced to start supporting someone else's stuff, this becomes a huge issue for their PR department. PR is usually directly under the CEO, so it's now a problem of the CEO to actually go and like actually put this on their we support X because they don't want to be seen supporting X because it's like a competing thing, which is bad. So this is also something which hampered adoption of this this format, at least in some cases. Some of them actually stopped and started adapting. Call out to Influx Data, which was the first to actually do that. I don't see Paul, but yeah, there he is. Yeah. Only goes to say that, yeah, good things are being paid forward. I mean, even 2 years later. So like this is an actual issue for a lot of people, and especially companies trying to sell a product, which is totally fine if they want to sell a product. And there's one more thing if you go into the more traditional vendor space, especially network vendors or storage vendors, unless you have like an official RFC, they just don't listen because it can't by definition be any good. And while the CNCF has a stance of like hands off of actual official standards, still within that like having an RFC to point to is like really nice, and you can have both, which is what we're talking about. Also, I think I'm way too fast. So basically the solution, as you probably might have guessed, is that we will be spinning out, or we are spinning out, the Prometheus Exposition format as its new own independent standard, which gives you this neutral brand. So whatever manager had an issue with supporting someone else's product now doesn't have that issue anymore because it's just a neutral brand and whatever. Also, this should be an umbrella for wider cooperation. There has been tons of cooperation going on behind the scenes, or well, actually we have been talking about this openly, but like there was a subset of people and companies really doing things. But still, OpenMetrics is also supposed to be an umbrella for people with an interest. And while like the current spec is finished, and that's a good thing, still we can iterate at some point on that. And then we also want to have like this umbrella. Then by just broadening the designer base, basically we really ensure that this, what we like was based on operational experience by a few people, is actually transposed and exposed to a lot more people who get then input on how this should look. And there have been actual changes between the Prometheus Exposition format and the and OpenMetrics, which are like super important for certain people, which we'll come to in a few. So that's also really good. And then the other thing, which is like for the traditional vendors, We do work on having like an official standard, like I'm working on an internet draft, which we will submit to the IETF. We also want to register an official MIME type, which is kind of a cyclic dependency with the RSC, but we'll solve that somehow. And maybe we'll even get an IANA port assignment for like the default exposing point, which kind of goes counter to how Prometheus does things, which is also done for good reasons. So maybe we won't. We are not quite sure yet. So what's our current status? We finished the discussion phase. We basically nailed everything down. Even if you look at all the issues, which we didn't close yet, you wouldn't suspect, but we actually like closed the discussion. Brian is working on a reference parser, which I'll be linking later, and the slides will be online, so you don't have to take pictures, so you're welcome to. And Google and Uber will also write a new or a second reference parser to like have 2 independent implementations of a reference parser to test against. And this testing is basically what OpenMetrics will be at a certain point. Not just like having an RFC and maybe some text somewhere, but like having an actual code base, an actual test suite you can run your stuff against, both for the exposing and for the ingesting side. And also for the pushing side, because we also support pushing for people who need pushing. Yeah. Oh, also what's not here, we will default and actually mandate that every single implementation which wants to call itself OpenMetrics compliant will be forced to be supporting the text format, just for reasons of real quick debugging and humans looking at things. And also, at least within Prometheus, we realized we are like really quick with the parser, so we don't even need the overhead of protobuf. But others like really like proto, or they need proto. So proto is like it's optional, but a first-class optional. But you have to like support always the text format. So the next steps, which are already ongoing, is to enhance the Prometheus client libraries to support OpenMetrics. There's a branch for the Python library, also linked later. To have full OpenMetrics support in Prometheus, OpenCensus M3DB, and I don't know why I put Uber there. That's a mistake, because it's M3DB. And a few others. For example, also Grafana sitting over there. And so people are actually already like preparing to support this. But what comes beyond just like this tiny slice of changing the world? Like, that would be boring. We also want to go beyond like just the cloud native space, because at its very core, like cloud native technologies is like solid good operation principles mixed with modern technology. But there have been good, solid operation principles like before the cloud native as well. And we also want to support these like first class to just however your actual IT infrastructure or whatever you have is just fully supported. And you just have like this one single thing which you can use, which today, let's face it, is SNMP, at least in some regards. But yeah, not a lot of people like working with SNMP. So like to actually, once we have this standard, to actually actively engage with all the network, with the storage vendors, with people who make hardware, with people who do whatever, maybe do the IoT or whatever. So not just like constrain it to like this cloud native space, but actually expand beyond that. There's another venue of expanding, basically going beyond just metrics. Because the one thing Prometheus does really well is metrics, you all know that, but it like doesn't do anything else. And there was very strong input from actually the OpenCensus people that they needed something to have histograms point to certain events, which you might remember from Jonas' talk just now, because it's just really convenient to just have like this one thing which you can just point to when you have your bad histograms or your high latency or whatever histograms. That's called exemplars, both within OpenCensus and within OpenMetrics. And some of the integrations which will support OpenMetrics already support this concept, again, like OpenCensus. And others, like in the foreseeable futures, will deliberately ignore this, for example, Prometheus. So you can just like drop that data, and we design it in a way that it's really easy to ignore that data, so you don't have to ingest it unless you want to. This Oh, wrong button. And then there's another thing, which expands even more on this going beyond metrics. I like to say that IT architectures at their very core like breathe. They go in and out all the time. You outsource, you insource, you go to a mainframe, you go to client server, you go to your dedicated, you have your VMs, you have your dedicated metal for like the databases. So it's always a back and forth, and you always like you go towards this one extreme, and then you go back towards the other extreme. And you see this in a lot of cases where you basically just have this tendency to go back and forth between those extremes, because every time you like go towards the other extreme, you solve whatever is the current issue with whatever you're having, and then you're actually solving this. The whole IT like improves, but then from there you have to like go back because you have a different problem which you can just solve by going back the other way. So basically, Prometheus breathed in because it's like really laser focused just on metrics, nothing else, just metrics. And OpenMetrics intends to breathe out again and just expand to more, to like encompass the whole open or the whole observability space again, to have like this one single thing which is a consistent user story where your developer or whatever can just go and like use it for all the things at once. And if you might remember, Tom over there did something about events within Grafana, which is like, that's exactly the same way. And we've been talking about this quite a bit because like this is exactly where I want to go. And if you remember what David showed, like you had basic label sets which were applicable to events, which for obvious reasons, it's way better what we had before, like with hierarchical data models, blah, blah, blah. So like breathing out, but on this level of where you already have push technology as in n-dimensional label sets and not being bound by those hierarchical models, which are totally horrible. So there's been a ton of commitments to actually support this. I'm listing just the initial ones because it's become just too many to list all of them. But these, which you see here, they actually committed to support OpenMetrics. There's a few acknowledgements. Basically, the main work has been done by 3 parties, several members of Prometheus team, Google and Uber, and we've been working on this in bi-weekly calls for like a year now. Yeah. So there's further reading. We also have the DAF summit from last year in there, just because most people aren't even aware that we make that public, and you probably want to read through it because it's really interesting. We've got a mailing list, we've got a repository, we have a few working branches, we've got a few other talks, and now we've got time for questions.
Hi there. I have a tiny remark and a question after that. So I noticed that there used to be this old website, openmetrics.xyz. Yes. It's nowadays just throwing a 404 page, which is slightly annoying.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was the remark. Anyway, the question. So I've also noticed that there are people from the RichiH community part of OpenMetrics, or I saw one of the names. No, not at all. Oh.
Well, it depends on how you define it. So again, like the people in the actual calls, on the bi-weekly calls were Prometheus, Google, and Uber. But there's like tons of people who were like, yes, we want to support this. But like, at least in my head, to make this actually be actively involved, those are the 3 parties because they actually like put in the actual work and the time to push this forward. But all the others who actually want to support this, yeah, I kind of lost track, to be honest.
Yeah, because I've noticed, at least at my work, I've got one side of the company who wants to use Prometheus, and the other side is more, want to look at RichiH for metrics, even though I think it's a piece of garbage, and it would be nice if I could somehow move them all over. Yeah.
I don't think OpenMetrics will help because then they can argue like, yay, we can just use that, but
oh.
Again, my wife was responsible for all the swag. And the other thing, Jerome, he's also here somewhere. He actually bought the OpenMetrics.io from some domain squatters, so now we moved over. We also just moved repositories, like to have it in a neutral band, blah, blah, blah. But we should be done with the name changes, I think, I hope. Next one. Möchtest du ein zweites Mikro? You have to press the button. Or yell and I repeat the question.
Hello? Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks for the talk. I'd be very happy to see OpenMetrics replace SNMP, for example. But I was wondering, you mentioned going beyond metrics. Would OpenMetrics include a specification or maybe at least a recommendation for example, authenticating, like because SNMP supports that concept, and I guess network vendors might be interested in that, or would you just say none of our concern, use HTTP for that?
Yeah, so basically, so initially I come from the networking side, and in my opinion, HTTP has become the new TCP because it's like everything has an HTTP endpoint, which is good in a great many regards. So basically, we define what you can do over an HTTP endpoint, and you should probably toss HTTPS over that. But that's like not part of the spec, and also like on that level, I literally don't care about that because it's just on a different layer in my stack. So, but yeah, you should. And also by not mandating this, like if there's TLS 1.4 or something tomorrow, then I don't have to care about it because they can just move independently.
What are the key differences between the current format of metrics exposed by Prometheus and OpenMetrics? Are there really big differences that are planned, or?
So if you have a fully featured OpenMetrics dataset, Prometheus will not be able to ingest that because it will reject it as invalid. The two most basic changes are A, we support exemplars, and B, we did things differently with timestamps, and else there's like lots of cleanups and stuff. But everyone who's familiar with the Prometheus Exposition format will immediately know how OpenMetrics works because it's mostly the same, just like refined and improved.
Will Prometheus be able to use an OpenMetric format and just ignore what it cannot ingest at some point?
Yes.
What is going to be the migration story? Is it going to be like, I mean, Prometheus just going to reject it maybe in the, I mean, what is the story for me if I want to use OpenMetrics and Prometheus is going to, implement support for this at some point? Do I have to like expose two different pages? Yeah.
So this is not fully defined yet, but what we think we will be doing is basically that the client library is supported, and if you come with a request for OpenMetrics data, then you just get OpenMetrics data. If you don't do that, then you get the Prometheus data, and at some point there will probably be a switch over, but this like default switch over will be very far into the future. But like this is the rough concept, but it's not hammered out.
Hey, thanks for the talk. I wanted to ask about OpenMetrics and OpenCensus. Are they related? Is like OpenCensus going to be gone and OpenMetrics sort of takes over, or how does these two compare?
No, like OpenCensus is one implementation of OpenMetrics, or OpenCensus has an endpoint which supports an implementation of OpenMetrics, to be really exact. And there are going to be tons of others. But like OpenCensus is actual code which you can use and compile and stuff. And OpenMetrics is literally just what you have on the line, like what's living on the network. Basically, I start caring about stuff at where you put data on the network, and I stop caring where you end putting it there. Well, and also the parser, but yeah, that's basically it.
Hey, a great job. I have a question. So how the underlying storage format will be different from the current Prometheus format to the OpenMetrics format? What are the main changes?
again, the main changes are you have exemplars, and we changed like how the timestamps look and how they work.
So this will introduce a lot of changes inside the storage format, or it's not that big?
There are no changes to Prometheus internally. It's just the format can do some extra stuff, which Prometheus will throw away. But there are things like nanosecond timestamps are supported because Paul and InfluxDB has a pile of financial companies who want nanosecond precision. Prometheus is still millisecond. No.
Great. Okay, thanks.
As we said, we talked to other people. They had feature requests. We added them because some people want more precision in milliseconds, and that's grand. And Prometheus will still work in milliseconds, and you probably shouldn't be exposing timestamps anyway.
I was about to say the same.
Any more questions? Yell if I don't see you.
Hi, thanks for the talk. How do you see this affecting how the client libraries are shaping up for Prometheus? If we end up with this open standard for producing metrics, do you see the client libraries as moving to be something that is less focused on Prometheus and more agnostic to the format?
So within the history of the project of Prometheus, we were always trying to like have more or less arbitrary or generic libraries which people could reuse, and people actually did reuse them for other stuff. So basically, same as with the reference parsers, we want to, like within the OpenMetrics context, move to a system where we have like maybe 1 or 2 reference implementations or reference libraries for different languages. And then basically, Prometheus libraries become one of the reference libraries of OpenMetrics in this scope. But what this actually means, like in terms of branding, where the repositories lives, blah blah blah, we'll figure it out.
So specifically in terms of exemplars, would you imagine that they would be featured within the Prometheus client libraries?
At least in as much that you can maybe toss, like you have an exemplar ID or something, and you just toss it in and you hand it over. So that's what my expectation is of how we will end up doing things. But again, this has not been hammered out. We actually have our dev summit tomorrow. So a lot of like these details will be discussed tomorrow.
Cool, thanks.
And we will also publish the notes for the Dev Summit.
We have time for maybe one more question. No? All right. Thank you.